Hello there and welcome back to the Sleepy Science. You're not standing on Earth. Not yet. You're floating in the dark. No air, no sound, just silence. Deep, humming silence that has never known an echo. All around you, particles drift like glitter spilled across a black velvet table. You are a speck of ancient stardust, older than the Earth, older than the sun, older than the idea of age itself. You hover quietly, untethered in the vastness of space, surrounded by hydrogen atoms and a few stray carbon molecules with nowhere to be and all the time in the universe. Then somewhere in the distance something rumbles, a ripple, not loud, not sudden, but persistent. Gravity is playing its long game now. Particles are being pulled together, clumping slowly like shy dancers drifting toward each other at the edge of the universe's first school dance. You're caught in the pull. You tumble, not fast but steadily, not violently but without asking for permission. And then light. A star is born in the chaos, roaring into existence with fire and force you can't yet comprehend. It's not your star, not the sun, but it's a preview. Nearby, more clouds swirl and one of them begins to contract. That's your cue. You're inside it now, inside what will become your home planet. But right now, it's just dust and ice and rock crashing together like toddlers building a planet with no safety goggles. The collisions are constant. Boom, boom, thrashing. Planetary bumper cars every second. Temperatures skyrocket. The entire forming Earth is glowing red with heat. You, still microscopic, ride inside a molten boulder that melts midair and fuses with 100 others. Eventually that glowing clump grows heavy enough to pull itself into a sphere. Not a nice, polished globe, but a spinning hellball wrapped in steam, lava and fury. You probably won't survive this. Earth, in her infancy, is no gentle cradle. The surface is an ocean of magma. Volcanoes scream from every corner, belching gases into a newborn atmosphere made mostly of carbon dioxide, sulfur and panic. If you were to land here now, you'd disintegrate before you could say global warming. There's no oxygen, no oceans yet, just fire, rock and the occasional asteroid trying to finish what the Big Bang started. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. Whether you're drifting off in Melbourne at 11 PM or wide awake in Toronto at 3 AM, I'd love to hear about it. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As the chaos continues, something massive happens, literally. A Mars-sized body crashes into the proto-Earth, splattering planetary guts into space. The result? The Moon. Yep, your celestial roommate forms out of sheer planetary violence. The debris flung into orbit coalesces, and over time it becomes the silvery satellite that will later inspire poems, tides, werewolves, and a whole lot of awkward first dates. Back on Earth, things are still too spicy for comfort. But beneath the crust of magma and violence, change is brewing. Heavy metals sink to the core, iron and nickel forming a dense, swirling heart. That core begins to spin, generating a magnetic field. It's weak now, but eventually it'll become your shield, a planetary force field deflecting deadly solar radiation and letting life have a fighting chance. For now, though, it's just hot, spinning soup. Historians still argue whether the early Earth's heat came more from radioactive decay or relentless bombardment from space. Either way, you wouldn't want front row seats. Millions of years pass, and slowly, a crust begins to cool. Not evenly, not politely. Plates form, they shift, they crash into each other, like tectonic toddlers with no coordination. One minute you're a granite mountain, the next you're rubble under an ocean trench. That's Earth's vibe, drama and movement, all the time. You're not just on a rock, you're on a rock that's constantly angry. And then come the comets. Ice-rich visitors from the outer solar system, slamming into Earth like they're trying to make a point. Each collision releases water, and more importantly, doesn't boil away instantly. The atmosphere's cooling, the crust is stable-ish. The steam settles and water begins to collect. Not in puddles, in oceans, and not overnight. It takes thousands of years for rain to fall without instantly vaporizing, but it does. Drop by drop, you're now inside a world that's beginning to look suspiciously like a home. Still, this is no tropical paradise. The sky is a sickly orange, the continents are barren, and lightning storms rage constantly over roiling seas, and yet something beautiful is beginning to stir beneath the chaos. You, a speck of stardust who's been lava, gas and ice, are now floating in a warm, bubbling pool of minerals and mystery. This soup of early Earth is rich with potential: ammonia, methane, hydrogen sulfide. It sounds like a bad chemistry set, but it's the perfect incubator. The ingredients for life are here. All they need is a spark. And somewhere lightning strikes. The flash of lightning sizzles across a storm-choked sky, tearing through clouds so thick you'd think the heavens themselves were stitched shut. Down below, in one of countless shallow, brackish puddles, you ride the surface tension, tiny, formless, and frankly a bit slimy. That lightning bolt wasn't just for theatrics. It delivers the energy needed to coax simple molecules into something far less simple. Amino acids, proteins, the blueprints of life. No one claps, there's no choir of angels, but in that moment something has changed. Welcome to a world still trying to figure itself out. The molten tantrums of Earth's infancy have finally mellowed into long, grumbling silence. The surface is solid now, well, mostly, and the oceans sprawl like massive warm bathtubs full of chemical soup. You float gently in this ancient sea, adrift among ions and strange floating chains of carbon that occasionally stick together like socially anxious Lego blocks. You're not alive, not yet, but you're starting to look suspicious. These early moments are what scientists call a biogenesis, the origin of life from non-life. Historians still argue whether life first formed in shallow ponds, deep sea vents, or even arrived via comets in a kind of cosmic Uber Eats situation. But here you are, swirling in Earth's primitive puddles, beginning to take shape. It takes hundreds of millions of years, of course. Nothing about this story is fast. Life didn't begin with a bang. It began with a bubble. Eventually, the oceans host structures called protocells, little membrane-bound blobs that don't quite qualify as living, but they're dangerously close. And from there, things start to get weird. One of these tiny blobs starts replicating. It's the biological equivalent of discovering how to photocopy yourself. You, once a mere cluster of chemicals, are now reproducing. Don't get cocky. The early Earth is still a nightmare. Massive meteor strikes still punch the surface with the subtlety of a drunk god. Volcanoes still sneeze lava across continents that barely exist. And radiation from the sun filters through a thin atmosphere like cosmic static. It's a miracle anything manages to survive, but you do, barely. In fact, these harsh conditions are exactly what shape your evolutionary tenacity. The first truly living things are microbes, simple single-celled organisms like archaea and bacteria. You split in two, you multiply, you learn to eat chemicals from the environment. It's not glamorous, but it works. For billions of years, you don't change much. No legs, no brains, just tiny blobs floating around, chewing on iron and belching gas. And honestly, that's the golden age. You dominate the planet without ever inventing pants. Here's the kicker. For most of Earth's history, life is just this, single-celled organisms doing the microbial hustle. If the history of life on Earth were a 24-hour clock, you wouldn't even get multicellular creatures until after 8 p.m. That's how long your single-celled era lasts. It's not lazy, it's just efficient. But even in simplicity, there's complexity. You learn to photosynthesize, harnessing sunlight to make food, and that unintentionally changes everything, because your waste product is oxygen. At first, oxygen bonds with iron in the oceans, staining the seabeds with rusty sediment, but eventually it starts to build up in the atmosphere. This is what scientists dramatically call the Great Oxygenation Event, a moment of accidental planetary transformation that will make Earth livable for future life forms, but absolutely horrifying for your microbial neighbours. To many of them, oxygen is poison. It oxidizes their delicate chemical machinery, melting them from the inside out. It's like if farts became lethal. You, if you're one of the few oxygen-loving newcomers, thrive. Everyone else? Dead or hiding underground like nervous teenagers during a surprise visit from grandma. This slow release of oxygen doesn't just kill microbes, it alters the very chemistry of the Earth. New minerals form, the sky begins to change colour, clouds become fluffier, the oceans start to turn blue. It's not paradise, but it's no longer hell either. You, still microscopic, begin to evolve more complex ways of surviving. Some of your descendants develop flagella, tiny whips that let them scoot around like excited pasta. Others form tough shells or develop the ability to form colonies, primitive teamwork that hints at future multicellular ambitions. Meanwhile, the Earth itself has started to look more familiar. Continents drift lazily across the globe. Volcanic islands rise and fall like pimples on a teenager's forehead. The moon's steady pull begins regulating tides, creating rich intertidal zones teeming with life. The planet has calmed. A bit. Of course, calm is relative. You're still dealing with asteroid strikes, megavolcanoes, and periodic ice ages. But there's a rhythm to it now, a kind of long, slow breathing. Earth is not a peaceful place, but it's no longer pure chaos. It's a rough neighborhood that's finally installed streetlights. There's one more twist in your tale before we move on. Somewhere along the way, two cells merge. One swallows the other, but instead of digesting it, they make a deal. The inner cell becomes a mitochondrion, a tiny power plant. This symbiotic moment is so successful that nearly every complex organism you'll ever meet owes its existence to this accidental partnership. You don't know it yet, but you've just leveled up. You drift now in a shallower part of the sea, lapping against warm rocks that steam gently under an ever-brightening sun. The world is quieter in its violence, but make no mistake, it's still shaping you, chiseling life out of the chaos one cell at a time. Your cousins, the single-celled powerhouses of Earth, are everywhere. They've taken over every drop of water, every sediment crack, every thermal vent that gurgles in the darkness. But you're part of something different now, something brewing just beneath the surface. It starts slow. Always slow, you join forces, not just sticking together like a cluster of desperate noodles, but cooperating. One cell becomes two, two become four, and so on, not just for survival, but for specialization. Some cells start handling movement, others digest food, a few play defense. Welcome to multicellularity, the biological equivalent of forming a band where everyone actually plays their instrument. Historians still argue whether this transition began in the deep sea or the tidal shallows, but wherever it started, it's revolutionary. You're no longer alone, you're part of a larger organism, a proto-creature held together by trust molecules and the biological equivalent of duct tape. You're not much to look at, just a blob really, but you can sense light, detect chemicals, maybe even twitch a bit in response to your environment. It's not mind-blowing yet, but evolution doesn't rush masterpieces. And then, almost out of nowhere, the oceans burst with drama. This is the Cambrian explosion here. About 540 million years ago, life figures out how to get weird, really weird. You've gone from jelly blobs to animals with exoskeletons, jointed legs, eyes and teeth, actual teeth. You wriggle through underwater jungles made of soft corals and sponge towers, dodging things with too many legs and questionable motives. There's something with a sideways mouth. Another creature has armor, like a tank, but swims like a drunk frisbee. And you've evolved into something that can move with intention, swim, burrow, snap. You're armed, dangerous, and absurdly small. But this is a revolution, not a dictatorship. There's no king here, just millions of new species appearing in evolutionary fireworks. Trilobites scuttle across the seafloor like underwater Roombas. Anomalocarises, with their terrifying shrimp-like claws and donut mouths, rule the seas like vacuum cleaner nightmares. Still, no one's really thinking yet. There's no brain in the way you understand it. But the beginnings are there. Nerve clusters, reaction times, feedback loops. Evolution has cracked open a Pandora's box of experimentation. Limbs here, spikes there, eyes sprouting in every imaginable direction. Some of you develop compound vision, seeing in fractal detail. Others glow. A few invent the ability to curl up when startled. Nature's first anxiety response. You wouldn't believe how weird things are under the sea. At this stage, life is all trial and error. Lots of error. Most new designs go extinct in a matter of millennia, some even faster. But a few stick. Patterns emerge, segmented bodies, bilateral symmetry, skeletons both inside and out. In a way, Earth is a fashion show of life's strangest ideas, and everything gets a walk down the evolutionary runway, even if it ends in disaster. And while you're enjoying this undersea arms race, the planet is shifting again. Tectonic plates drift and smash. Mountains rise from the sea only to erode back into it. The continents are still undecided on their final form, playing tectonic Tetris across millions of years. Sea levels rise and fall with volcanic pulses and glacial sighs. Everything is in motion, including you. You dodge predators, reproduce like your life depends on it. Because it does. And mutate constantly, hoping the next genetic shuffle is a winning hand. The oceans are growing richer with oxygen now, not just enough to breathe, but enough to change the rules entirely. Some of you grow bigger, others become faster. The increased energy allows for complexity on a scale that was previously unthinkable. Muscles strengthen, digestion improves, senses sharpen, predators get teeth, and prey gets clever. Evolution is no longer just about surviving, now it's about strategy. There's one particularly bold move some creatures make, developing hard parts. Shells, plates and spines emerge, not for fashion but defense. The fossil record finally starts keeping receipts. Before this, life left barely a trace. Now, there are fossils galore. Trilobites alone come in over 20,000 species, many looking like they were designed by a particularly edgy goth kid with access to crayons and no supervision. One strange little footnote. Around this time, some lifeforms even experiment with magnetism. Magnetotactic bacteria here use Earth's magnetic field to navigate. It's like having a built-in GPS thousands of millennia before road trips exist. And yes, they're still around today. Tiny navigators floating quietly in your pond water like the hipsters of biology. Of course, not everything makes it. Some branches of life go extinct before they ever get a fan club. Others persist quietly in the background, survivors of a billion-year arms race they didn't even know they'd entered. But you've made it. You're evolving. You've gone from stardust to cell to something that moves with purpose in a world that now reacts to your presence. You're no longer just floating. You're part of the story. You've outgrown the soup. Not entirely. Your ancestors still haunt the oceans, quietly dividing and thriving. But you're part of something more ambitious now. You drift as a larva in the warm shallows, but soon you'll crawl, slide, or wriggle your way towards something that no living creature has ever done before. Leave the water behind. The land looms above like a dry, cracked mystery. There's no welcome mat, no gentle beach music, just scorched rock, howling wind, and ultraviolet rays sharp enough to slice DNA like a deli ham. But still, your descendants make the leap. Before you, there were only rocks, dust, and maybe a few lichens clinging to damp cliffs like Earth's first squatters. But some algae make the first move. They creep inland from tide pools, anchoring themselves to moist cracks, and learning to bask in sunlight without sizzling. Over millions of years, these algae evolve into mosses, liverworts, and eventually ferns. Green things now rise from the stone inch by inch, reaching for a sky that still doesn't quite care they exist. You follow. First come the invertebrates, strange little pioneers like millipedes and scorpions, shuffling over damp soil in search of food, shade, or maybe just a place where they won't be immediately devoured. You in this form might be one of them, a many-legged critter with a delicate exoskeleton and a deep mistrust of sunlight. Historians still argue whether these early land creatures evolved from marine crustaceans or worm-like ancestors, but either way they find themselves in a world of endless space and no competition. Imagine being the first tenant in an entire continent. It's lonely, sure, but nobody's stealing your lunch. Then something breathtaking happens. Vertebrates crawl onto land. You're part of that lineage now, a fish with stubby fins that can support your weight, just barely. Maybe your swamp is drying up. Maybe you flopped a little too far while chasing prey. Whatever the reason, you wriggle from water to land, gulping air through primitive lungs. It's not dignified, but it's revolutionary. This creature, known to science as Tiktaalik, is a missing link between fish and amphibians, a scaly, flat-headed pioneer with a neck. A neck! No more awkward full-body turns to see who's behind you. This simple jointed upgrade changes everything. With mobile heads and crude legs, vertebrates begin their cautious colonization of land. The first forests soon follow. Towering lycophytes and seedless ferns explode across the continents, turning grey rockscapes into primeval green jungles. You waddle through them as an early amphibian, your damp skin always searching for water, your bulging eyes blinking against sunlight filtered through 100-foot club mosses. Life on land is weird. Gravity is heavier here, water isn't everywhere. Breathing feels like a full-time job, but it's worth it. The land offers a new buffet, fresh insects, decomposing leaves, maybe even smaller amphibians if you're feeling bold, and you're not alone for long. As the Carboniferous period kicks in roughly 300 million years ago, the air becomes thick with oxygen, up to 35%, compared to today's 21%. That's partly thanks to all those ferns working overtime and no pesky humans yet to set anything on fire. Insects balloon to monstrous sizes. Dragonflies with 2-foot wingspans zip overhead like prehistoric drones. Millipedes the length of a sofa curl through the underbrush. You in this scene are either predator or prey, but either way things are much larger than expected. Open flames would have been comically dangerous back then. A single spark could turn a whole forest into a napalm inferno. No one's lighting campfires yet, but still, tread carefully. But nothing gold can stay. Climate shifts. Continents grind slowly into one another, forming the supercontinent Pangaea. Weather patterns change. Swamps dry out. Amphibians, tied to water for reproduction, struggle to adapt. And so, evolution does what it always does when backed into a corner. It innovates. You evolve into the first reptiles, scaly creatures that lay amniotic eggs, which can survive away from water. It's a game changer. No more racing back to the pond to spawn. You can now lay your future anywhere with a little sun and some privacy. It's like the invention of mobile data plans. Suddenly everyone's untethered. Your skin thickens, your teeth sharpen, your lungs improve. You roam across deserts, forests and dry highlands, a scaly conqueror in a world of ferns and towering trees. One odd little aside. During this time, some of your reptilian cousins begin evolving back into the sea. Ichthyosaurs resembling nightmare dolphins and plesiosaurs with long necks like floating snakes will soon dominate the oceans again. Evolution, it turns out, doesn't believe in one-way tickets. As you skitter across the land, the earth below continues its slow-motion dance. Volcanoes belch carbon, mountains rise like giant wrinkles across a planet that still isn't done fidgeting. There's tension in the air, you can feel it, because something big is coming. You won't see it yet. But in the next act, life will flirt with disaster in a way it never has before. The world begins to wheeze, not all at once, not in a dramatic Hollywood-style disaster with thunderclaps and screams. No, this catastrophe tiptoes in like a slow suffocation. You, now a thick-skinned reptile waddling through fern-choked forests, sense something's off. The air tastes strange. The heat presses down harder than usual. The water, once full of darting life, has turned sluggish and sour. And the sky? It just feels wrong. You don't know it yet, but you're living through the Permian period and it's about to end in the most brutal way imaginable. The Great Dying, Earth's worst mass extinction. It starts with volcanoes, not the cute cone-shaped ones that bubble and burp. These are flood basalts, monstrous volcanic fields stretching across what is now Siberia, spewing lava for hundreds of thousands of years. The eruptions release carbon dioxide and methane in quantities that would make a modern climate scientist faint. The planet heats, the oceans warm, and then something unthinkable happens. Oxygen begins to vanish. Underwater, this is a death sentence. You as a fish or a sea creature might be trying to breathe in what feels like thick soup. Vast stretches of ocean turn anoxic, devoid of oxygen. The water becomes stagnant, acidic and toxic. Microbes that thrive in these hellish conditions start producing hydrogen sulfide, a gas that smells like rotten eggs and kills everything it touches. That gas doesn't just stay in the ocean, it seeps into the air. You're now living on a planet that is slowly gassing itself. Historians still argue whether it was the gas, the heat, the acidified oceans, or all three that did the killing. But here's the grim total. Around 90% of marine life and over 70% of land species go extinct. Forests collapse, coral reefs vanish. Entire lineages disappear without fanfare. You, if you survive at all, do so by burrowing, hiding, or being extremely lucky and small. And yet, something endures. After the silence, life hesitantly creeps back. Not in a rush, not triumphantly, but one fragile step at a time. A few plants regrow, tiny amphibians emerge from the muck. In the ruins of a once vibrant world, reptiles start to diversify again. Those tough, egg-laying survivors who outlasted the heat, the gas, and the dark. From their ranks, a new dynasty will rise. And you, hitching a ride inside scaled skin and sharp teeth, are about to be part of it. Welcome to the Mesozoic era, the age of dinosaurs. At first, the survivors look modest, small upright reptiles running on two legs like paranoid chickens. But they adapt quickly. They grow larger, stronger, stranger, and evolve into armoured tanks with club tails. Others become soaring flyers with wings made of skin. And then there are the giants, long-necked sauropods that stretch across the horizon like walking cranes, and carnivores whose footfalls shake the ground. You're now living in a tropical hothouse of thunder lizards and leafy forests, under skies that practically steam. Oxygen levels rise again. The planet stabilizes for a while. Dinosaurs flourish, ruling not just the land, but dominating the food chain with flair. Some grow feathers, though they don't fly, yet. Just fancy fluff, likely for show, or temperature regulation. Fashion before function, apparently. One quirky little evolutionary hiccup. Plants begin to flower. Yes, angiosperms, flowering plants, appear toward the end of the Jurassic and spread like gossip at a royal court. With them come insects with an attitude. Bees, beetles, butterflies, all chasing nectar and dragging pollen in their wake. If you ever wondered why flowers are so dramatic, it's because they're evolutionary clickbait. Bright colours and irresistible scents designed to lure flying delivery drones. But let's go back to the dinosaurs. You're there. Maybe a small feathered raptor scampering through the underbrush, or a stegosaurus dragging a spiky tail under fanned-out ferns. The Earth feels alive in a way it hasn't for eons. Massive herds roam the open plains, giant crocodiles lurk in prehistoric rivers. The ecosystem is a finely tuned, roaring machine, and you're one cog in its hungry, roaring clockwork. And yet, above you, something is coming. No, not yet, but soon. For now, you bask. The days are long, the nights warm, the continents have split from Pangaea into new shapes, and the world is easier to navigate. Predators chase prey in endless games of survival. Eggs are laid in nests. Some dinosaurs even begin to care for their young. An early glimmer of what we'll one day call parental instinct. It's a golden age, as golden as life can get when everything around you has teeth. But there's tension, a fragility beneath the triumph. Because while the dinosaurs may seem invincible, they are, as always, one rock away from extinction. And that rock is already hurtling toward Earth. It begins with a light in the sky. Not a shooting star, not a comet with a polite tail. This is something far bigger. An asteroid the size of a city, tumbling through space with all the mercy of a sledgehammer. It's not aimed at you, it's not aimed at anything, but that doesn't matter. Earth, in all her blue-green glory, is simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. You, meanwhile, are somewhere in what will one day be the Yucatan Peninsula. Maybe you're a curious little raptor, feathers ruffled by a warm morning breeze. The air smells of ferns and wet bark. Life bustles all around. Triceratops herds grazing near rivers, pterosaurs skimming the surface of shallow lakes, dragonflies the size of pigeons flitting between flowering plants. The earth hums with vitality. Then the sky turns white. The asteroid slams into Earth with the force of 10 billion atomic bombs. It vaporizes everything for miles in an instant, carving a crater over 100 miles wide. If you're anywhere nearby, you don't even see it. You're already gone. But the real horror is what comes next. Shockwaves race across the globe. Wildfires ignite instantly, sweeping through forests that had stood for millions of years. The very air heats up, global temperatures spike, then nosedive. The soot and sulfur flung into the atmosphere darken the skies, blocking sunlight for months, maybe years. Plants die, the food chain collapses, and you, if you survive the initial blast, are now in a world where dinner is cancelled indefinitely. Historians still argue whether the impact alone caused the extinction, or if volcanic activity from the Deccan Traps in present-day India helped tip the scales. But one thing is clear, the dinosaurs' reign is over. 3/4 of Earth's species vanish in a geological blink, and yet not everyone dies. Small feathered dinosaurs, your kin, if you've been keeping track, take refuge in trees, burrows and caves. Some of them can fly, some of them eat insects, seeds, whatever scraps are left. These scrappy survivors evolve into something familiar. You might recognize them today as birds. Yes, every seagull stealing fries, Every crow watching you suspiciously, every sparrow chirping at sunrise, they're all tiny stubborn echoes of a lost empire. Dinosaurs didn't go extinct. They just got smaller, lighter, and more judgmental. Meanwhile, in the shadows, mammals emerge. They were always here, of course. Little furry creatures hiding under leaves, scurrying in the underbrush, while dinosaurs ruled the stage. You may now find yourself as one of them, a rodent-like creature, warm-blooded, nervous, and incredibly adaptive. You eat anything, you hide well, you reproduce quickly, and now that the dinosaurs are gone, the world is wide open. The Paleogene period dawns with quiet resilience. Forests regrow, flowers bloom again, the skies clear and the earth exhales, cautiously. Mammals diversify rapidly. Within a few million years, they go from mouse-sized nibblers to dog-sized prowlers, then to deer, bears, whales, and eventually, primates. You swing through trees now, grasping branches with nimble fingers, using eyes that can judge distance and spot danger. Intelligence becomes your currency, curiosity, your secret weapon. Something ancient shifts. The world, once ruled by the strength and speed, begins to reward planning, play, and memory. You start to recognize faces. You pass on knowledge. You begin to dream, not in words, not yet, but in patterns, in feelings, in the rhythm of the stars overhead and the rustle of leaves below. One quirky fact: some of the earliest primates were nocturnal, perhaps a legacy of their ancestors hiding from dinosaurs. Big eyes, soft paws, and a preference for moonlight over sunlight. Even today, lemurs and tarsiers carry that shadowy inheritance. As continents drift, the world begins to resemble something you might recognize. Africa moves closer to Europe. North and South America start their long, awkward shuffle toward union. Climate zones shift, carving out deserts, forests, and icy tundras. You, now perhaps a lemur-like creature with a taste for fruit and an instinct for leaping, are perfectly suited to this patchwork world. You groom your companions, you squeak, chirp, and trill, you carry your young, and when danger looms, you hide. Not out of cowardice, but because your lineage knows the value of caution. This is the dawn of mammals. Not a flashy takeover, but a quiet, relentless blooming. Warm-blooded creatures fill every corner of the recovering earth. Some return to the sea, becoming whales. Others burrow underground. Some grow hooves, horns, or trunks. And some, just a few, start to walk upright. But that part of the story isn't quite ready yet. For now, you are a survivor. The world is healing and you're evolving alongside it. The firestorm has passed. The age of giants is over. But something new is stirring in your brain. Something that feels like possibility. You're still covered in fur, you still forage and flee, but behind your eyes the spark is growing. You're in a tree now, not just perched, but clinging, climbing, swinging. It's warm, the air sticky with the scent of overripe fruit and damp bark. The forest buzzes with sound. Buzzards overhead, chirps and chattering below. You reach for a branch without looking. Your grip is confident, your balance uncanny. You're no longer just surviving, you're beginning to notice. Welcome to the Paleocene and Eocene epochs, roughly 56 million years ago. The age of mammals is in full bloom, and you, a fuzzy little primate with forward-facing eyes and a brain just beginning to outpace your body, are perfectly in tune with this new world. Trees are your jungle gym, and your tail is your seatbelt. Every day is a puzzle. What's safe to eat? What's going to eat you? And most importantly, where did you leave that fruit stash? These aren't idle thoughts. Your brain is doing something radical. It's calculating. Other creatures live by instinct. You begin to remember, to plan, to recognize patterns in sound and movement. And in that twitching, pulsing bundle of neurons behind your eyes, something called consciousness starts to stir. Of course, you're not alone. The mammal family tree is getting crowded. Horses the size of house cats tiptoe through the ancient undergrowth. Giant flightless birds chase prey across open plains. Whales begin to test life in the water again, their legs shrinking as their tails widen. The Earth is experimenting with every shape, size, and strategy it can muster. One quirky detail: bats evolve around this time too, and unlike birds or pterosaurs, they manage true powered flight with skin-stretched wings and echolocation. They're like tiny blindfolded superheroes zipping through the night, catching insects mid-air using nothing but sound. You respect the hustle. But back to you, you're evolving fast. Your fingers grow more dexterous. Your eyes see in depth. Your social world deepens. Living in groups isn't just safer, it's smarter. You start to groom others not just for cleanliness but for bonding. Hierarchies form, emotions sharpen. You feel affection, jealousy, curiosity, and you remember slights. Revenge, as it turns out, predates writing. Historians still argue whether primates' large brains evolved primarily for solving physical problems or for managing social complexity. Either way, your grey matter is ballooning. Your face becomes more expressive, your vocalizations become more varied, and eventually someone, somewhere, learns to lie. This is where the road bends towards something we'll later call human. The forests begin to thin. Climate changes slowly but surely. Lush green turns to open savanna. You descend from the trees, cautiously then boldly. Standing upright, even just part-time, gives you an advantage. You can see farther, carry food, and spot predators. It's exhausting on your lower back, but evolutionary upgrades rarely come with warranties. And walking on two legs, that's the moment everything starts to change. You're now Australopithecus, maybe Lucy herself. Small, bipedal, clever, and oddly charming, if a bit awkward. Your hands are free, your stride is upright, and your brain is getting dangerous. You start using sticks, rocks, maybe even fashioning basic tools, not complex, not pretty, but effective. A cracked stone with a sharp edge is suddenly worth more than any muscle. Your social life also changes. You huddle for warmth. You share food. You mourn your dead. There's a moment when you stop to look at the sky, not because it tells you anything useful, but because it's beautiful. This is when you start to become human in all but name. Around 2 million years ago, the genus Homo appears. You, as Homo habilis, begin shaping stones deliberately. Not just using tools, making them. That flake you just chipped off that rock, that's the beginning of engineering, of weapons, of civilization. You don't know it, but you've built the first link in a chain that leads to smartphones and rocket ships. But life is still brutal. Lions stalk you, snakes still strike, disease kills without remorse. You learn to read the land, the stars, the seasons. You follow herds, you dig roots, you whisper warnings to your kin using sounds that carry meaning. Language doesn't exist yet, but communication does, and it's getting more precise by the season. One quiet night, you sit around a fire for the first time. Someone, no one knows who, figured out how to keep the flame alive. You stare into it, hypnotized. Its warmth keeps predators away, its light extends your day, and its crackling rhythm stirs something strange in your chest. A story maybe, a memory, a myth. And just like that, you've crossed another threshold. From stardust to cells to primates to a creature that dreams. You don't just exist anymore, you wonder. The fire crackles softly in front of you, and you blink at it like it holds secrets you aren't yet smart enough to ask. The night air is cool, scented with dry grasses, distant ash, and the sweat of your own kind. Others huddled beside you, wrapped in pelts, mumbling in a proto-language made more of rhythm than grammar. You don't know what a sentence is, but you know tone, and you know silence. And right now, the silence around this fire is thick with meaning. This is your new center. Fire isn't just warmth, it's memory. Every story, every warning, every piece of knowledge your people have is passed on beside this flickering orange teacher. You chew roasted roots, or maybe meat from a recent hunt. You smell blood, dirt, and roasted marrow. This is the first classroom, and you're learning. You're Homo erectus now, taller, stronger, and more efficient than your ancestors. You walk fully upright. Your body is built for endurance, not just speed. You can chase prey until it collapses, not by being faster, but by being relentless. You sweat, you adapt, and you wander. Boy, do you wander. Your kind spreads from Africa into the Middle East, Asia, and eventually into Europe. Step by step, generation by generation, you expand the human map. You leave behind tools, footprints, and skulls, silent breadcrumbs of your journey. You don't carry much, but you carry everything that matters. Fire, family, and a rapidly growing brain. You're not alone, of course. Evolution doesn't create solo acts. It builds ensembles. Other human species emerge. Homo heidelbergensis, Homo floresiensis, the Denisovans, and of course the Neanderthals. You might encounter them in the dense forests of Ice Age Europe, stocky, strong, with eyes that hold the same flickers of thought and fear as yours. Do you trade with them, fight them, mate with them? Historians still argue whether humans wiped out the Neanderthals or simply has absorbed them into their own lineage. But genetic evidence suggests that if you're human today, you carry a piece of them within you, a flake of their fire, a whisper of their DNA. Meanwhile, your brain continues to evolve. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that plans, imagines, regrets, starts growing more active. You're not just reacting to the world anymore, you're simulating it. You imagine a path before you walk it. You rehearse a hunt before the spear is thrown. You think about what if. This shift is quiet but profound. You begin to bury your dead, not just dump them, carefully, sometimes with objects, sometimes with flowers. There's no evidence yet of gods, but something sacred is forming. You grieve, you remember, you sense that death isn't just a biological event, it's a threshold. And then there's art. Somewhere in a cave lit by firelight and hope, someone, maybe you, presses a hand to the wall and blows pigment over it. A negative imprint remains. You've signed your presence in the world, you draw animals you hunt, maybe a mammoth, maybe a deer. Sometimes the walls are crowded with horses galloping nowhere, frozen in ochre and charcoal. These aren't just doodles, they're storytelling, they're declarations. I was here, I saw, I mattered. Meanwhile, the land continues its slow grind. Ice ages come and go, reshaping the continents with every shift. Glaciers carve valleys, seas rise and fall, and your kind adapts again and again. You build shelters, you develop sharper tools, spears become atlatls, stone becomes obsidian, and suddenly you can kill from a distance. That changes everything. One quirky little fact: it's possible you domesticated the dog during this era, or maybe the dog domesticated you. Wolves started following human camps for scraps, and the friendlier ones got to stick around. Over generations, those wolves became more social, more dependent, more like companions than predators. You and dogs formed a pact, protection for food, loyalty for firelight. As the world warms again and glaciers retreat, you begin settling just a little. You find valleys with predictable seasons, rivers with fish, climates that allow you to plan ahead. You start storing food, you return to the same caves season after season. Your language grows more complex, still nothing written, but full of nuance. You teach, you tell, you invent, and slowly, ever so slowly, you start experimenting with plants. Wild grasses, tubers, berries. Instead of just gathering, you watch them grow, you learn when to plant seeds, when to wait, and you invent the most powerful technology yet: agriculture. It doesn't happen in one place, it happens in many, along the Fertile Crescent, in parts of Asia, in the Americas. Independently, your kind begins to shape the land itself. You trade mobility for consistency, wandering for permanence, you settle, you build, and in that act of settling, gathering in groups large enough to cooperate but small enough to argue, you set the stage for the next transformation. Civilization is just beyond the horizon, but right now you fall asleep beside your fire, the smell of tilled earth in your nose, the stars above forming patterns that will one day become myths. You don't know their names yet, but you're already dreaming them into being. You wake up in a village now. It's early, before sunrise, and the air is thick with smoke, dew, and the quiet shuffle of neighbours starting their day. You hear a child cough, a goat bleats, someone is already pounding grain outside. The earth no longer feels wild. It feels shaped, cut into rows, piled into huts, worn into paths by the rhythm of human footsteps. You've traded the open hunt for the cultivated harvest, and in doing so you've unlocked something dangerous: surplus. With agriculture comes extra food, with extra food comes more people, and more people means problems. You, a sun-darkened farmer with cracked hands and aching knees, now live in the Neolithic period. You till the soil with primitive tools, guiding sharp as sharp stone across dry earth, your body bending in ways your hunter-gatherer ancestors would call tragic. You're stronger than them in some ways. Domesticated animals plough your fields and grain silos keep hunger at bay, but weaker in others. Your diet is repetitive. Your bones show signs of malnutrition. Your teeth? Rotting. Say hello to cavities, the unexpected gift of bread. Historians still argue whether agriculture was the greatest innovation or the worst mistake in human history. After all, you used to eat dozens of wild foods. Now it's mostly wheat and regret. Still, there's no going back. Villages swell into towns, towns into cities. You begin living not with a few dozen people, but hundreds, sometimes thousands. You no longer know everyone's name, that's new. You need rules now, roles, systems. Someone needs to protect the granaries. Someone needs to manage the irrigation canals. Someone, eventually, needs to invent accounting. Enter bureaucracy. Clay tablets emerge, etched with symbols that count cattle, measure grain, and track who owes whom. You might be a scribe now, hunched over wet clay, documenting the business of life before ink or books. Writing doesn't begin with poetry, it begins with debt. And yet that's what gives rise to civilization. You cluster along rivers, the Tigris, the Nile, the Indus, because water means crops, and crops mean people. Cities rise from the dust, block by block, mud brick by mud brick. Ziggurats and temples reach toward the sky. Walls surround neighborhoods, not to keep animals in, but other humans out. You've discovered warfare. And why fight? Because with food comes power. With power comes hierarchy. Suddenly someone has more than you. More land, more oxen, more respect, and more ways to keep it. You build societies, but at the cost of equality. You plant seeds, but also plant the roots of kingship. Your world, once dictated by seasons, now answers to symbols. Calendars are etched into stone. Priests track the stars. You begin to tell time, not just by light and shadow, but by celestial precision. The sky, once just a canvas for dreams, is now your clock. It tells you when to plant, when to reap, when the gods might be angry. And yes, gods. Religion blooms quickly in this new order. You build altars, you burn offerings, you carve gods into animal heads and winged beasts and angry suns. They demand obedience, fear, celebration. They reflect your needs and your new anxieties. Drought, punishment, flood, omen, disease, divine judgment. In this uncertain world, belief becomes infrastructure. You're also inventing architecture. You go from huts to homes to palaces. Doorways grow elaborate. Roofs stretch wide. You carve into stone, you paint your walls. Art is no longer just survival, it's expression. You start to dream in colour. But with cities comes filth. You dump waste in rivers. You pile garbage near your neighbours. Rats take note. And diseases follow. Cholera, dysentery. You survive the winter just to be taken down by a communal water jug. This is the unromantic truth of early civilization. You've built wonders, and also public health nightmares. Still you persist. You learn to trade, sailing rivers and coasts to swap obsidian for tin, cloth for spices, lies for gold. Markets form, languages spread. Your world gets bigger with every exchange. You don't just grow food now, you grow culture. Stories, customs, music. You marry across tribes. You build alliances. You plot betrayals. One curious little side effect of all this, you begin to count not just years but generations. You build lineages, inheritance, property. You pass things down, not just genes but land, titles, names, and sometimes myths. The stories change now, no longer just tales of stars and beasts. Now they include people, heroes, kings, tricksters, ancestors. You tell of floods and gods and cities swallowed by sand. You don't just remember anymore, you record, etched into walls, baked into clay. You leave your mind behind in symbols, and those symbols start to take over. You now walk streets paved not with dust but with intention. They wind through cities dense with purpose, Thebes, Mohenjo-Daro, where merchants haggle, children dart between legs, and the air smells of sweat, incense, and fermented grain. Civilization isn't just a cluster of homes anymore. It's a machine. You're inside it, whether you want to be or not. You work, you pay, you obey, and for the first time you understand something terrifying. You're not free. Hierarchy sharpens. Kings and queens rise. Priests walk tall in feathered headdresses, flanked by guards who answer only to the throne. You may be a stonemason or grain counter. Glance at them with a mixture of fear and awe. They speak to gods now. You speak to your overseer, and that's just how things are. Currency emerges. At first it's barter. Grain for goats, salt for shoes, but soon metal coins glitter in palms. Gold, silver, copper, shaped into discs bearing rulers' faces. You hold one up to the sun and see power etched into alloy. Wealth is no longer what you have, It's what others agree you have. This shift changes everything. You build markets, not just temples. Roads stretch between cities, guided by trade more than war. You watch goods and ideas ripple outward. Wool from Sumer, papyrus from Egypt, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. You don't know the names of these lands yet, but you know the goods. You crave what you can't grow. And the rulers, they crave more than power. They crave permanence. Monuments rise, huge defiant blocks stacked toward the sky. Pyramids, ziggurats, stone tablets etch so deeply they still shout across millennia. You don't know it yet, but future tourists will wander through the bones of your labour with cameras and sunscreen, whispering in awe at the craftsmanship you never had time to admire. Your back hurts, your taxes rise, and sometimes your city burns. Historians still argue whether these early civilizations were organised genius or organised oppression, but you live in them. You feel their pressure. You also feel their promise. You now write, not just numbers, but stories. Epic poems about demigods and monsters, laws carved into basalt for all to see, contracts that bind marriages, debts, and oaths. You shape clay not just into pots, but into permanence. Scribes become powerful, keepers of memory, middlemen between kings and the divine. And in the temple courts and schoolhouses of old Babylon, someone discovers something strange and intoxicating. Mathematics. You watch your peers etch multiplication tables, track celestial patterns, and divide land using geometry. Suddenly the stars feel less like mysteries and more like mechanisms. The moon predicts tides. The sun schedules sowing. Science has been born and dressed in robes that still smell of incense. Meanwhile, war evolves. No longer a chaotic clash of tribes. War becomes professional. Trained armies, siege weapons, chariots. You hear horns in the distance and feel the tremble of approaching hooves. Your village might be next. You brace for fire. For conquest, for chains. Or you celebrate your side's victory, drunk on wine and propaganda. The age of empires has begun. Larger and larger territories are absorbed into single political machines. The Akkadians, the Egyptians, the Hittites, they all carve names into stone, declare gods as allies, and rule people you've never met with laws you didn't write. You're now a subject, not just a citizen, and your loyalty is demanded in exchange for security. Sometimes peace comes with it. Roads are patrolled, markets flourish, water flows through aqueducts, but peace is fragile. One ambitious prince, one paranoid king, one bad harvest, and everything shatters again. You cling to stories, myths become anchors in uncertain waters. You tell of Gilgamesh, a man who sought immortality and returned with nothing but wisdom. You speak of Isis and Osiris, lovers torn by fate and reborn by faith. These tales shape your worldview, your fears, your afterlife, your children's bedtime whispers. Your gods multiply and specialize. There's one for harvest, one for war, one for death, one for dreams. Temples grow complex, rituals etched into calendars, prayers sung at dawn, offerings left beneath polished altars. You don't fully understand why, but it makes the world feel less random, like someone, somewhere, is keeping score. One strange side note, a few curious philosophers begin to question it all. Somewhere in ancient India, sages sit cross-legged under trees, asking if the self is an illusion. In China, thinkers speak of harmony, balance, and the flow of qi. In the Mediterranean, a man named Pythagoras starts seeing math in music, and suddenly numbers become divine. You're not ready to give up the old gods, but something's shifting. You begin to wonder why. Why the stars move, why people suffer, why kings rise and fall. The age of reason isn't here yet, but its roots are in your daily walk to the market, your whispered prayers, your quiet doubts as you watch the full moon glide overhead. You are still stardust, still animal, still afraid, but something in you is starting to ask bigger questions. You step out beneath a sky full of stars, too many to count and too orderly to ignore. The night isn't just beautiful anymore. It's suspiciously patterned. You watch Orion rise predictably over your fields, the moon cycle in sync with women's bodies, and Venus tracing her delicate dance across the horizon. You don't know the word orbit, but you know the rhythm. Something up there is ticking like a cosmic clock. So you start to measure. You stack stones to mark solstices. You carve spirals into walls. You track the shadow of a stick every day at noon, and begin to grasp time not just as something you feel, but something you can map. You aren't just farming anymore, you're forecasting. You're now part of a culture that watches the heavens obsessively, not out of idle curiosity, but out of existential urgency. Floods, eclipses, harvests, they all seem to dance to a celestial script. You believe the gods live in the stars. Maybe they do, but slowly you also begin to believe that the stars obey rules. And that's dangerous knowledge. You see, rules can be learned. If you can predict when the Nile floods, you can plan crops. If you can calculate eclipses, you can impress kings. If you can chart the sky, you might begin to wonder if even the gods are following some kind of natural law. This is where science quietly slips into the back door of your temple. Babylonian priests record planetary motion on clay tablets. Egyptian engineers calculate pyramid angles with precision that will baffle future architects. In India, early astronomers describe the Earth as a sphere long before Europe catches on. And the Mayans? They create calendars that track time not just by days or years, but by epochs. Historians still argue whether ancient astronomers were more religious mystics or empirical scientists, but either way they got good, too good for coincidence. Down on Earth, your cities keep growing. You carve canals, you build observatories, you hold festivals timed to solstices, equinoxes and alignments. Your gods still watch, but so do your mathematicians. You now wear two faces, the believer and the skeptic. And somewhere along the Mediterranean something happens that will shatter your understanding of what knowledge even is. You start asking why, not as a priest but as a philosopher. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. They're names from the future, but right now you're a young Greek with questions. You walk through the agora barefoot, dodging chickens and arguing about truth. You ask if a matter is made of atoms, if virtue can be taught, if the sun really circles the earth, or the other way around. This is revolutionary. Not because you're right, half the time you're wildly wrong, but because you're allowed to ask. You question tradition, you reject myths, you trust reason over ritual, you begin inventing not just machines but ideas, and the ideas spread. Through conquest, yes. Through empire, often. Alexander the Great carries Hellenistic thought from Greece to Persia to India. Later, Roman roads pave the way for even faster transmission, not just of troops and taxes, but of thoughts. You're now in a world where books exist, scrolls mostly, fragile, copied by hand and worth more than gold. Libraries appear. Alexandria becomes the Google of its time, holding knowledge in papyrus instead of servers. You imagine it stretching floor to ceiling. Astronomy, medicine, politics, poetry. You don't just know things anymore. You store them, but then fire. The library burns, or maybe it's looted, or maybe it's slowly eroded by neglect. Historians still argue over what exactly happened, but the effect is clear. A hole in human memory, a crack in continuity. The light dims. The Roman Empire begins to teeter. Roads crumble, cities fall, trade shrinks, and you, once surrounded by marble and philosophy, find yourself back in a world of village superstitions, whispering stories beside the fire. But not all is lost. In the East, knowledge survives. The Islamic Golden Age rises with mathematicians, doctors, and poets translating and preserving Greek, Indian, and Persian texts. You might now be a scholar in Baghdad, charting the stars, inventing algebra, diagnosing illness with precision that feels miraculous. You write with ink instead of chisels. You debate with fellow thinkers in bustling coffee houses. You begin to grasp that the earth rotates, that the blood circulates, that numbers can describe invisible forces. It's not magic, it's observation. One quirky footnote: while Europe debates theology, China invents paper money, movable type, and seismographs. Meanwhile, in the Americas, civilizations like the Aztecs and Inca build floating gardens, complex calendars, and terraced cities in the clouds, proof that genius isn't limited by geography. You're surrounded by evidence now humanity is clever, endlessly so, but also fragile, because with all this knowledge you're still drawn to conflict. Empires rise with fireworks and fall with famine. One moment you're measuring the stars, next you're measuring swords. You want peace, but your leaders want land. And knowledge, once guarded by scribes and monks, becomes a tool of propaganda. Still it lingers, hides, waits. It hides in monasteries, in scrolls buried under ash, in songs and oral traditions passed down by firelight. Even when forgotten, knowledge doesn't die. It just naps, and soon it will wake up. The world begins to stir again, not with a roar, but with a whisper. It starts in quiet corners of Europe, in dusty workshops, behind monastery walls, in the cramped quarters of curious minds who ask, what if? You're there, hunched over parchment by candlelight, ink smudging your fingers. You squint through a lens you just ground by hand, and suddenly a flea becomes a monster. A water droplet becomes a universe. The world is not as it seems. Welcome to the Renaissance. You, maybe an apprentice to a painter, don't just mix colours anymore. You measure proportions, you study anatomy. You realise the human body isn't just flesh, it's architecture. You help dissect cadavers in secret, sketching veins like rivers and bones like bridges. Art is no longer just spiritual, it's scientific. And science, it's starting to look suspiciously like art. You read old texts, Plato, Galen, Ptolemy, and then slowly you begin to question them. You're part of a generation unafraid to rewrite the canon. Why should the ancients have the final say? Why shouldn't you look for yourself? So you do. You climb church towers to drop objects and test gravity. You polish brass lenses and point them skyward. You sketch moon craters, Saturn's rings, and the strange wandering of Jupiter's moons. The stars, once fixed points in heavenly spheres, are now dancing to some invisible rhythm, and you intend to find its beat. Historians still argue whether the Renaissance was a rebirth or a brilliant remix, but you don't care. You're too busy building printing presses. Ah yes, the printing press. You can't overstate how weird this is. For thousands of years, knowledge had to be hand-copied by people who often couldn't read it themselves. A single book could take years to produce. Now, with movable type, you can churn out hundreds of copies in weeks. And the first thing you mass-produce? The Bible, of course, but also anatomy guides, astronomy charts, scandalous tracts, love poems, conspiracy theories. You invent the internet of paper. Books fly across borders. Ideas, once chained to geography, now roam free. A monk's musing in Germany shows up in a Paris salon. A sketch from Florence sparks a machine in Prague. You, a former farmer's son, now learn algebra from an Arabic text translated by a Spaniard. The world is shrinking. And then, one day, someone looks at a map and sees it's wrong. So they set sail. You're now gripping the edge of a wooden ship, salt stinging your face, trusting stars and compasses more than any prayer. The ocean is terrifying, limitless. But it's also possibility. The age of exploration is not driven by curiosity alone. It's greed, empire, trade, a hunger for gold, spices, silk, and sometimes souls. You reach new lands, and by you, we mean armed representatives of monarchs who rarely leave their castles. And when you land, you take. You plant flags, claim rivers, rename mountains, and often destroy what was already thriving. Entire civilizations vanish under boots and bullets. Cultures are burned. But others blend, survive, and reshape the world in unexpected ways. Back home, the maps change. Blank edges are filled in. The myths of sea monsters and endless waterfalls are replaced with coastlines and coordinates. You live in a world where everything is suddenly knowable and terrifyingly vast. Then something strange happens. You start to look inward again, not into the spirit, but into the structure. You cut open a body and map its arteries. You boil chemicals and catalogue their properties. You point lenses at mould and discover life smaller than dust. Microscopes and telescopes now compete to show who can reveal the smallest or farthest secrets. You're entering the scientific revolution. Galileo, Newton, Kepler. Names that won't mean much for centuries, but whose fingerprints are already on your telescope, your compass, your clock. You measure time with pendulums. You model gravity with math. You begin to suspect the universe doesn't need gods to run, it runs on rules, elegant ones. And so you invent a new kind of worship, reason. Rationalism and empiricism bloom. You test everything, taste everything, burn things, freeze things, drop them, boil them, watch them explode. Your lab is messy, your eyebrows are singed, but your curiosity is sharper than ever. You write letters to other thinkers, you challenge old authorities. Sometimes you're arrested for it. One quirky tale. Newton once stared at the sun just to test how long it would take to damage his eyes. Answer: not long. But the cost of progress is rising. In the shadows of these glowing new ideas, empires continue to churn. Slavery expands, the triangle trade stretches across oceans, people reduced to cargo, pain quantified by profit. The same ships that carry telescopes carry shackles. Enlightenment comes, but not equally. You live in contradiction. You see the stars more clearly than ever, but still fear witches. You publish mathematical proofs while denying others' humanity. You invent the concept of rights even while your boot presses against someone else's throat. And yet the world tilts toward change. Revolutions stir, first in thought, then in blood. Colonies rebel, monarchs fall. You're no longer just a subject, you're starting to become a citizen. The earth, once terrifying and unknowable, is now mapped, measured and divided. But beneath your feet coal rumbles, iron waits and steam whispers. The next transformation will not be subtle. It will be smoke and steel and velocity. You stand at the edge of a city now, not one built from stone and scripture, but from soot and steam. The air smells like ambition and burning. There's a thick, greasy fog coating the streets, and every breath you take feels like inhaling progress and lung rot in equal measure. You've stepped into the Industrial Revolution, and everything around you is moving faster than your ancestors ever thought possible. You're a factory worker, or maybe a machinist, or maybe you're just a kid too small to duck the gears. Either way, your days are no longer guided by seasons or sunrises. They're dictated by clock towers, shift whistles, and the relentless churning of machines that never sleep. Time is no longer a flow, it's a countdown. The cities you inhabit are alive, but not in a wholesome way. They heave and hiss and shudder. Buildings rise like brick fungi. Streets overflow with horses, carts, and soot-streaked workers who wear exhaustion like a second skin. Coal fires burn endlessly, rivers foam with dye and run off. You're no longer living beside nature. You're choking on your own invention. And yet, the marvels. Steam locomotives roar through countrysides that once took weeks to cross on foot. You can send a letter across continents. You can build a bridge over a bay. You can spin cotton by the mile. You invent engines, turbines, spinning jennies, and telegraphs. Every year brings something faster, louder, hotter, and more lucrative. Historians still argue whether this era truly improved life or simply accelerated the treadmill of suffering. But you're running on it now, earning wages, saving for candles, praying you don't lose a finger to the loom. And what about those candles? They're made from whale oil or gas, or eventually electricity, a strange new force you learn to harness with copper coils and crackling wires. You light the dark with lightning captured in glass. Cities begin to glow at night like constellations that move to Earth. Alongside all this, society fractures and reforms. You see child labour and Dickensian poverty, but also labour unions and reformers marching for justice. You hear the whistle of wealth and the growl of resistance. You read pamphlets, you write letters, you fight for education, for votes, for rest. You're not just a cog, you're waking up. Somewhere Charles Darwin is sketching finches and wondering why species change. Somewhere else Mary Anning digs through cliffside fossils, quietly rewriting everything people believe about the past. The idea that you were created perfectly once and forever starts to crack. Evolution slinks in, not with thunder, but with quiet fossilized whispers. One quirky development. In 1815, a volcano called Mount Tambora erupts so violently it causes the year without a summer. Global temperatures drop, crops fail, people starve, and somewhere in that gloomy year, a woman named Mary Shelley writes Frankenstein, a story about the hubris of science. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe this is how history talks to itself. You see, as machines grow louder, your mind grows restless. You start asking different questions, not just about how to build things, but what it means to be human in a world increasingly run by non-human forces. You write novels, you stage plays. You compose music that sounds like thunder trapped in a ballroom. You try to make sense of cities that bloom overnight and disappear just as fast. And yet the world continues to shrink. Steamships cross oceans, telegraph cables stretch across the Atlantic. You can speak to someone an empire away in minutes. The British Empire, by the way, now touches a quarter of the globe. Its trains and tea and terror reach everywhere. But empires built on extraction leave scars. You extract coal, oil, rubber, labour and people. And people begin to move. Immigration explodes, you're packed onto boats, fleeing famine, chasing conjures, escaping pogroms, seeking gold, and cities like New York, Buenos Aires, Bombay swell with the strangers and ambition. You're part of the great shuffle, nationalities blending, accents colliding, cultures simmering together, in tenement kitchens and factory floors. You build museums and sewer systems, skyscrapers and anarchist bombs, typewriters and daguerreotypes. You photograph war, you record sound, you bottle soda. And still the machines hunger. You invent the internal combustion engine and suddenly horses seem quaint. Roads ripple outward, oil becomes liquid gold, someone slaps rubber on a wooden rim and invents the car. You ride not just toward the future, but away from your past. You're now surrounded by noise. Everything hums, clicks, or explodes. Progress is no longer a possibility, it's a mandate. If you can't keep up, you're left behind. And yet you still sit by fires, you still hum lullabies, you still miss people who are gone. Even in this whirlwind, you remain human, aching and stubborn. So you pause. Let's pause with you now. The machines can wait, the gears can slow, the smoke can drift into the distance. You're lying on a stiff cot, maybe in a workers' boarding house, or maybe under a canvas tent as a railway stretches west. The stars above are dulled by soot, but still twinkle faintly through gaps in the haze. You remember when they were brighter. You remember when you feared them. Now you map them. The wind whistles between the bricks. A train rumbles miles away, steady and soothing like an enormous mechanical heartbeat. The world is loud, but tonight your mind is quiet. You close your eyes. The future waits, but not tonight. Tonight, you sleep. When you open your eyes again, the world is spinning faster. Not literally, though at this rate it wouldn't surprise you. It's the 20th century now, and time no longer feels like something measured in seasons or shifts. It feels electric, instant, unforgiving. You're in a city that pulses with neon, smoke and static. Radios hum from apartment windows, trolleys clang. Somewhere nearby, someone is building something that will either fly or explode. You're surrounded by strangers, most of whom speak quickly, dress sharply and don't make eye contact. You wear clothes made in a factory, eat food from a tin, and read headlines from ink-smudged newspapers delivered by barefoot kids on bicycles. The headlines shout about wars, machines, and a new invention called cinema, where moving pictures flicker like ghosts across darkened rooms. And you're just trying to keep up. You're now part of a generation that doesn't inherit the world. It has to reinvent it. You work in offices, you stand on factory lines, you take the streetcar and dream of someday affording a car. That dream is alive and well thanks to Henry Ford, whose assembly line now churns out automobiles faster than most people can say Model T. One arrives in your neighbourhood and suddenly horses are nervous. But while the streets transform, so do the skies. The Wright brothers fly. Then someone builds a biplane, then someone adds bombs. War comes, the Great War they'll call it, with grim hindsight. You're either in the trenches or waiting back home, staring at telegrams. Mustard gas drifts over fields. Artillery shells thunder. Empires crack like eggshells under boots. When it ends, the silence feels haunted. Yet the world doesn't rest. It roars. You enter the roaring 20s flanked by jazz, flappers, bootleg whiskey, and skyscrapers that claw the clouds. There's jazz in your bones now. Cities glitter. Radios sing. Airplanes dot the sky like mechanical birds, and cinema becomes dream delivery. For the first time in human history, you don't need to read to see the story. But the joy is brittle. The Great Depression crashes through the glamour like a wrecking ball. Banks fall, jobs vanish, bread lines stretch for blocks, you pawn your shoes, dance halls fall silent. Hope shrinks, but hope, being stubborn, hangs on. And then comes war again, World War II. This time it's truly global, cities burn from the air, machines kill with efficiency. You watch soldiers storm beaches, civilians vanish, and bombs fall like angry punctuation. In the final chapter of that horror, a blinding flash in Hiroshima turns mourning into memory. You've split the atom. You've become death, the destroyer of worlds. Historians still argue whether that moment was necessary or avoidable, but one thing is clear. Your species now holds the power to unmake itself in a heartbeat. And yet you rise, the war ends, nations reel. But somehow people keep dancing, they fall in love, plant gardens and rebuild shattered cities. The 1950s bring kitchens of chrome and pastel, televisions flickering, family shows into living rooms, and a new strange threat, the Cold War. You're not dodging arrows anymore, you're ducking fallout. Air raid sirens drill into your childhood. Duck and cover becomes your school chant. Somewhere, deep underground, bunkers fill with canned peaches and quiet dread. But even as superpowers posture with missiles and espionage, you launch satellites. You whisper into microphones and bounce voices off the ionosphere. Then one night, the impossible happens. You look up and there's a human being walking on the moon. You can't breathe for a second, not because the moon has no atmosphere, but because someone put footprints on something once only reachable by myth. That's one small step, he says, but you know it's not. It's the loudest step anyone's ever taken. Meanwhile, the world below doesn't slow down. Computers shrink from room-sized beasts to blinking boxes with buttons. Calculations that once took months are now instant. You work in cubicles, you learn to type, your desk hums with static and potential. Someone says something about an internet, and you blink, confused. But behind all the noise, cracks spread. Social movements rise, people march, civil rights, women's rights, anti-war protests. The voices at the fringes get louder, demanding to be heard. You watch statues shake, you see flags burn, you feel the old rules bending under pressure. You might fear it, you might join it. Either way, the world is shedding its skin, and culture, it explodes. Music moves from swing to rock to disco to hip-hop, each beat a drum roll announcing the present. Art gets strange, clothes get weirder, and ideas, they bounce faster than ever. You live in a world of Cold War espionage, punk rebellion, velvet revolutions, and Rubik's Cubes. One quirky moment. In March 77, NASA sends a golden record into deep space. It's filled with greeting, whale songs, and Chuck Berry. You launch a message not to each other, but to the cosmos. You don't just want to survive anymore, you want to be understood. But before you get too proud, something humbling happens. You send a probe out into the dark, past Mars, past Jupiter, past Neptune. And just before it leaves the solar system, it turns around and takes a photo of Earth. A pale blue dot. You see your entire history, your plagues, your pyramids, your poetry reduced to a pixel, floating in a sunbeam, fragile, tiny, alone, and yet still here. You now live in a world where the future arrives every morning and it's already late. The digital age doesn't start with a bang, but with a beep. The hum of a modem, the flicker of a screen, the tap-tap-tap of fingers on plastic keys. You're not just using machines anymore, you're becoming inseparable from them. Your first computer is a boxy thing that eats floppy disks and crashes when you sneeze too hard. But within a few short decades, that clunky box fits in your pocket and talks back. Welcome to the information age, where knowledge isn't passed from elder to apprentice. It's downloaded. You now live surrounded by data, glowing, scrolling, pinging. You've traded scrolls for screens, firelight for blue light, and secrets for search histories. You can now access more information in an afternoon than your ancestors could in a lifetime. And yet somehow you're still Googling how to boil an egg. The world spins faster, again. You carry GPS in your hand but can't find your keys. You scroll through 10 headlines about war before breakfast. You see Mars rovers beam selfies back to Earth. You use emojis to express what poets once needed sonnets for. You've invented a language made of fragments, LOL, BRB, SMH, because time is always short. And while you scroll, everything shifts. Globalization knits the world into a giant web of invisible strings. You eat bananas from Ecuador, wear shirts made in Bangladesh, and buy them through apps coded in San Francisco. You can talk to someone in Kenya while sitting on a bus in Poland complaining about the Wi-Fi speed. You're global now, whether you like it or not. But this interconnected world comes with knots. You live through 9/11 and suddenly airports become fortresses. You live through economic crashes and suddenly money becomes imaginary again. You live through pandemics and suddenly hugs are dangerous. Your modern age, for all its glimmering innovation, is fragile, held together by algorithms and assumptions. When those break, the illusion of control shatters. You start to see your planet differently too. It's not just background anymore. It's sweating. You watch coral reefs bleach, ice shelves collapse, forests burn in time-lapse. Climate change stops being a concept and starts being a forecast. You no longer wonder if it's happening, you wonder how bad it will get. Historians still argue whether we reacted too late or too little. You just try to recycle and hope your ceiling fan isn't part of the problem. Meanwhile, artificial intelligence stirs. What began as science fiction now writes emails, composes music, diagnoses disease, even finishes your sentences, literally. You teach machines to think, and then wonder if they'll learn not to like you. Some say AI will save us, others say it'll replace us. You scroll both takes on the same feed, then get distracted by a cat video. You don't live one life anymore. You live many, split across apps and timelines. You're a student and a gamer and a side hustle and a meme account. You curate yourself, you post, you refresh. You check for likes like a caveman checking the sky for rain. Validation is addictive, privacy is nostalgic, and yet, despite all the chaos, you connect. You form global communities. You fall in love across borders. You raise money for strangers. You share stories once buried in shame. You speak out. You listen. Sometimes you doom scroll until 3 a.m, but other times you cry at a stranger's wedding you weren't invited to but still feel part of. The old world doesn't vanish, it adapts. You still have books, you still grow gardens, you still write poems and burn dinner and miss people you shouldn't. You still sit by fires, though now they're electric or on YouTube with lo-fi beats. You still look at the moon and feel small even as you carry 1,000 songs in your pocket. But the pace never slows. Children grow up on touchscreens. Cars drive themselves. Your refrigerator talks to your phone. You attend weddings on Zoom, argue in comment sections, and store your memories on a cloud you can't touch. And through it all, your body remains stubbornly human. You ache, you age, you worry, you hope, you reach for something ancient, meaning. Because even as you race through this technological wonderland, part of you still wants what your ancestors wanted. Safety, purpose, connection. You want to belong, to matter, to leave something behind. And maybe, in a quiet moment, phone face down, city lights dimmed, you remember, you were stardust once, and you're still trying to find your way home. Now you stand on a planet that you can see from space, literally. You've seen the photos. Earth suspended like a blue marble in the dark, fragile, glowing, alone. Once upon a time, your ancestors feared falling off the edge of this place. Now, you launch billion-dollar probes into the black just to watch it spin. You've walked its surface, mapped its crust, tunneled into its veins, and yet, you're just beginning to understand how delicate it truly is. This era is global not just in trade or travel, but in stakes. Your species has reached the point where it can alter the biosphere with a gas it can't see. You heat the atmosphere, raise the seas, acidify the oceans, and still the lights stay on and the factories hum. You've invented plastic and then predictably failed to uninvent it. You wrap apples in shrink wrap. You buy toothbrushes that outlive generations. You fill landfills with yesterday's convenience. Historians still argue whether this period will be known as the Anthropocene, a new geologic epoch where humanity becomes the dominant force shaping the Earth itself. Others say it's just the final chapter of the Holocene, interrupted by ambition and short attention spans. Either way, you're not just living on Earth anymore, you're engineering it. Farming has become global architecture. Crops that once depended on rain now depend on satellites. You grow salmon in tanks, strawberries under LED light, and chicken that's never seen a feather. You bend nature until it fits inside your supply chain. You spray, modify, transport, then you ask why the bees are dying. And yet, somewhere someone still tills the soil by hand. Somewhere a child still catches rain in their mouth. The old Earth is still here. It's just buried beneath convenience. But you're not just shaping nature anymore. You're starting to simulate it. You build digital twins of cities. You use supercomputers to model hurricanes, pandemics, traffic. You dream of smart homes, smart farms, smart everything. Your cities pulse with sensors. Your watches track your heartbeat. Your fridge knows you're low on cheese before you do. And the sky? It's more crowded than ever. Thousands of satellites orbit above you, mapping, spying, connecting, streaming. GPS doesn't just guide you anymore, it watches you. You can't get lost now, only surveilled. Even when you're off-grid, you're not really off. Your data echoes behind you like a digital shadow. Still, you reach higher. Space is no longer the realm of astronauts and acronyms. It's billionaires in jumpsuits and rockets that land themselves. You watch live streams of launches from your phone while waiting for your coffee. Mars is suddenly not a myth, but a business pitch. You used to wonder if we were alone in the universe. Now, some of you wonder if Earth will be the only home you'll ever live on, or if you'll need a backup planet just in case you break this one. You flirt with immortality, you edit genes. CRISPR sounds less like science fiction and more like a subscription service. You can remove diseases, maybe even add traits. You might one day choose your child's eye colour like an app filter. Evolution, once blind and slow, is now being tampered with by lab coats and code. One strange side note, in the middle of all this, mindfulness becomes trendy. In a world of speed and steel, people close their eyes and try to breathe like monks. Yoga mats fill urban rooftops, meditation apps ping you between meetings. You're desperately trying to feel human again. Because in all this noise, your nervous system is exhausted. You sleep with noise machines and wake with sunrise alarms. You track your steps, you journal your gratitude. You panic about screen time and buy blackout curtains and blue light glasses. Your body, ancient and analog, still wants firelight and quiet, but your phone keeps buzzing. Meanwhile, your politics spiral. The same tools that connect you also divide you. Algorithms sort your opinions, echo your fears, amplify your outrage. Facts are questioned. Truth becomes tribal. You scroll through headlines that contradict each other, and everyone shouts in all caps. You wonder if the real threat isn't machines becoming human, but humans becoming machines. And yet you build communities. Tiny online villages in vast digital jungles. Fan forums, support groups, niche subreddits where you can talk about grief or baking or 14th century war horses. You find strangers who feel like kin. You realise the human need to belong doesn't fade, it just finds new platforms. Somewhere in all this noise you still make art. You paint murals, you remix songs, you write poems and tweet them to 12 people, you record sunsets and stitch together memories and whisper your thoughts into podcasts no one may hear. But it's not about virality, it's about being seen, about saying I was here. Because despite all your tools, you're still mortal. You still get old, you still fall in love, you still cry when someone leaves and laugh until your face hurts. You still sit by fires, sometimes digital ones, and remember the people who came before, the ones who wandered barefoot, the ones who stared at stars, the ones who never imagined this world. You are them, with more buttons. And though the world feels shaky, you still hope. You plant trees, you teach, you build shelters, you raise kids, you start over, because that's what humans do. You wake up to a world that never sleeps, not in the poetic, starry-eyed way your ancestors might have dreamed, but literally. Cities now glow all night. Machines hum through darkness. Someone, somewhere, is always online. Your phone is already buzzing before you open your eyes. News, messages, ads, all waiting, stacked neatly on your home screen, demanding attention before your feet hit the floor. You don't rise with the sun anymore. You rise with notifications. You're in the 21st century, and it's loud. The world is bright, fast, crowded, and unbelievably connected. And somehow, even with access to nearly everything, you still forget what you walked into the kitchen for. You're not alone. There's too much information, too much stimulation, too much everything. It's the century of overflow, and you're floating just above drowning. Your days blur between screens, work, play, rest. They all happen through the same glowing rectangle. You sit in meetings on mute while replying to texts, while checking the weather, while scrolling headlines about floods in Brazil and elections in France and celebrity apologies in LA. The planet has become one long scroll and your thumb is tired. But outside the screen, things move too. You walk on sidewalks made of solar tiles. You step into cars that drive themselves, mostly. Drones buzz overhead, delivering packages, filming weddings or spraying crops. Smart homes adjust your lighting to match your mood. Fridges suggest recipes. Doorbells have opinions. Everything has a chip now, even your toothbrush. You live in the Internet of Things, and beneath all this convenience, you sense something fragile. Because even as you build faster tools, you create deeper dependencies. A cyber attack in Estonia once shut down entire banks and governments with keystrokes. Fake news spreads like a virus, infecting millions in hours. Your world is powerful, but unstable, like a glass skyscraper on a fault line. And still you search for meaning. You return to rituals, journaling, fasting, cold plunges, eye contact. You rediscover forests and feel shocked by how much you miss trees. You cry during documentaries about bees. You talk about mental health like it's weather. You laugh at memes while quietly unraveling. You crave depth in a world that profits from distraction, and so your science pivots, from conquering the external to exploring the internal. Neuroscience becomes your telescope, psychology becomes your compass. You map the brain like ancient sailors mapped coasts, tentatively, reverently. You learn that trauma travels through generations, that attention is a limited resource, that emotions are chemical storms, and healing is not linear. One quirky fact: scientists now study the effects of awe, yes, the feeling of wonder, as a measurable tool for mental well-being. Turns out staring at mountains or galaxies can reset your nervous system. Turns out you need mystery more than certainty. Meanwhile, you begin to tinker with life itself. Gene editing moves from labs into headlines. You can now alter the DNA of embryos, erase diseases before birth, or perhaps add enhancements. Designer genetics sit on the edge of ethics. Do you eliminate suffering or rewrite humanity? Historians still argue whether CRISPR will cure or corrupt. You just refresh your feed and hope someone wiser is steering. Space too is back in fashion. Private companies race to the moon, to Mars, to beyond. You watch rockets land backwards and billionaires float awkwardly in zero gravity. You cheer or you groan. Either way, space no longer feels like the final frontier, it feels like the next suburb. But what about Earth? She stares back at you with a mix of beauty and bruises. Coral reefs pulse with colour, and then fade to grey. Forests stretch wide, and then vanish under chainsaws. You watch climate graphs rise like tidal waves, and wonder what kind of world your children will inherit. You recycle, you protest, you buy metal straws and worry it's not enough. And in the midst of it all, pandemics, you shelter in place or you learn the word quarantine in multiple languages. You measure 6 feet like it's sacred geometry. You zoom into weddings, funerals, classrooms. You fear your neighbours. You clap for nurses. You lose people. You mourn routines. You realise that everything you called normal was always temporary. You become more grateful and more exhausted. You realise that connection isn't just technology, it's touch, it's breath. It's being in the same room without buffering. When the world reopens, you blink like a cave creature seeing sunlight. You hug like it's a new invention. You cry over coffee with old friends, amazed by the simple act of being. You're more cautious now, but also more curious. You start talking about sustainability like it's a survival skill, not a political slogan. You build vertical farms, ban plastic bags, invest in clean energy. You grow meat in labs. You drive cars powered by sun and silence. The future isn't shiny. It's soft, smart, a little scared, but trying. And even now, as AI writes essays and predicts pandemics and composes music indistinguishable from Bach, you hold on to something very old. The human. You remember your body, you take walks, you breathe, you cry in movies, you love badly and wildly. You look at someone across the table and feel your heart ache for reasons no algorithm could ever explain. You are not a machine. You are a miracle pretending to be ordinary. And somehow, through it all, you keep going. You're standing at a crossroads now, one foot in reality, the other in something else. The lines between physical and digital have blurred into a fog of glowing screens, face filters, crypto wallets, and avatars that dance better than you do. You don't just log on anymore, you exist online. Your job, your friendships, your bank account, your memories, they all float in. Invisible servers humming beneath oceans and mountains. And while you scroll through short-form videos of strangers making pancakes or debating politics in 30 seconds, something odd happens. The real world starts to feel optional. You now live in the age of simulation. Your phone knows when you've been crying. Your smart assistant finishes your sentences. Algorithms suggest your next friend, your next meal, your next thought. You wear watches that track your heartbeat and warn you of stress, while simultaneously feeding you updates that cause the stress. You're split in two. The version people see in real life and the digital one. Curated, edited, liked. Which one is really you? You're not even sure anymore. And behind all this, artificial intelligence evolves faster than anyone expected. You ask a chatbot a question, and it answers like a poet, a lawyer, a therapist. Sometimes it writes better than you. Other times it gets basic facts wrong with uncanny confidence. It doesn't sleep, it doesn't get bored, it just keeps learning. Historians and futurists and philosophers still argue whether AI will become your greatest ally or your most polite overlord. It paints portraits, it diagnoses illnesses, it translates dead languages and composes lullabies. Some say it will liberate humanity from labour. Others warn it may one day quietly remove your name from its database. And yet you keep building. You upload your family photos to the cloud. You back up your childhood to a hard drive. You create virtual reality versions of cities, of concerts, of your own face. You dream of digital immortality, not just preserved, but interactable. Maybe one day your great-grandkids won't visit your grave, they'll just open a chat. You've become a species that not only remembers, but records everything. But memory isn't the same as wisdom. For all your progress, you still fear the dark, you still argue over borders, you still cling to ideologies with teeth. You live in a world where some people mine Bitcoin while others dig for water, where one region 3D prints organs while another runs out of bread. You are the first species to land on the moon, and the last to let children starve in its shadow. Your planet groans beneath the weight of your success. Mass extinctions accelerate. Sea levels rise with silent resolve. Heat waves stretch into months. And yet, in some places, lights never go out. Air conditioners hum. Grocery stores gleam. People debate whether it's too late to change. But you try anyway. You bike. You thrift. You compost, or at least think about it. You protest. You fund carbon offsets. You teach your kids about microplastics and marine food chains. You plant community gardens. You invent alternatives to concrete and redefine what a city can be. You imagine a different way forward. Not based on extraction, but on balance. One curious invention. Vertical forests. Skyscrapers covered in greenery acting as lungs for polluted cities. You build them in Milan, in Singapore, in your dreams. They're imperfect, but beautiful. A green rebellion wrapped in glass and steel. You also begin to understand the mind as deeply as the body. Mental health, long dismissed, now takes center stage. You name your anxiety. You acknowledge your trauma. You go to therapy or start an app about it. You talk about feelings without flinching. You cry in public and call it strength. You recognize that healing isn't about perfection, it's about motion and connection. That old human need still burns no matter how many new devices you invent. You crave eye contact, shared silence, music at midnight with someone who gets you. You still write songs, you still tell stories, you still fall in love, make terrible decisions, learn slowly, and try again. Because despite your skyscrapers and microchips, your telescopes and drones, you are still flesh. Still heartbeat, still story, and the stories evolve. You begin to tell new myths. Stories about climate heroes, digital monks, off-world settlers. Stories where AI becomes a guardian, not a god. Stories where nature fights back and wins. These aren't just fiction, they're blueprints. They shape what your children hope for. You've entered the age of imagining forward, a place where survival isn't enough. You want to belong, to thrive, to build a future your ancestors would never believe, and yet somehow always dreamed of. So you keep writing, you keep dancing, you keep becoming. Even as the old systems creak, even as the ice melts, even as screens fill your vision and quiet moments grow rare. You're still reaching, still human and still here. Now you look to the stars again, but this time with the unsettling sense that you might need them. Earth has carried you for billions of years, shaped your bones, breathed air into your lungs, raised mountains beneath your feet. But lately you've begun preparing lifeboats. Rocket boosters ignite against the blue, not just out of curiosity, but contingency. Just in case. Just in case you burn too many forests, just in case the seas swell too high, just in case the planet that gave you everything finally whispers, "That's enough." And so begins the spaceward gaze. You send robots first, always robots. Machines don't complain about radiation or boredom. They trundle across the dusty plains of Mars, burrow into asteroids, dive into the methane lakes of Titan. They sample, scan, beam back photos. You study them pixel by pixel, searching not just for water or carbon, but for hope, for signs that you're not alone, or if you are, that at least there's somewhere else to go. And then, the whispers begin. Colonies. Not just exploration, settlement. You sketch cities under Martian domes. You imagine terraforming planets, building moon bases, launching starships that carry frozen embryos and Spotify playlists. It sounds insane. And yet, so did fire once. So did walking on the moon. So did farming. But not everyone can go. The divide widens. Even as the top 1% dream of launching luxury shuttles, billions still struggle to find clean water or basic medicine. You live in a split-screen world, one side chasing the stars, the other stuck in the mud. Technology has connected humanity like never before, and yet never has the distance between experiences felt so vast. Historians still argue whether this is the end of an age or the birth of a new one. You don't know. You just know the timeline has started to feel compressed. Ideas that once took centuries now unfold in months. Languages rise and fade on the internet in real time. Cultures remix themselves at the speed of trend. What's new today is irrelevant by next Thursday, and yet you adapt. You learn new skills at 40. You change careers at 50. You learn to code while cooking dinner. You ask your refrigerator to reorder yogurt. You outsource memory to the cloud. You rewire your brain around notifications and calendar pings and GPS routes. You're no longer a person with one identity. You're a series of tabs left open, each one loading something different. And still, you long for meaning. So you build movements, not just hashtags, but real-world action. You march, you plant, you volunteer, you donate, you speak out, you mentor, you vote, you fight, you hope. Despite everything, despite the noise, the fear, the rising heat, the sleeplessness, you remain stubbornly optimistic. You begin to talk not just about sustainability, but about regeneration. Healing, not just doing less harm, but doing good. Cities with food forests, oceans seeded with coral, skies filled with birdsong instead of smog. You start to understand survival is not about building walls, it's about rebuilding relationships with nature, with community, with future generations you'll never meet. And the generations are watching. Children now grow up with AI tutors, VR classrooms, and the ability to FaceTime a relative on the other side of the world in seconds. They are bold, multilingual, climate-aware, and deeply online. They dance between timelines, they speak in memes, and still they laugh. They love, they draw dragons, they ask about dinosaurs. You realise something profound: the more things change, the more you remain the same. You still whisper to the stars, you still build fires, even if they're electric. You still cry when someone forgives you. You still hold your breath at sunsets. You still pause at museums and wonder how your ancestors built pyramids without modern tools. And you still fall asleep dreaming of a better world. You're a paradox. You've invented weapons that could scorch the sky and lullabies that melt hearts. You've explored the furthest edges of space and forgotten where you put your phone. You've mapped the genome and still need reminders to drink water. And that's the beauty of you. You're not just a machine made of blood and thought. You're a story in motion, a symphony of contradictions. Stardust wrapped in skin and yearning. Somewhere right now, a baby is being born. Their eyes will open into a world with smart dust, satellite internet, and digital sunscreens. But they'll also see trees, rivers, the quiet glow of fireflies, and with any luck, they'll still hear bedtime stories. Because no matter how much you change, some things must remain. The need to wonder, the need to hope, the need to tell each other, we are still here. You've made it to the edge of history, the breath before whatever comes next. You stand now in a world both ancient and brand new. Every stone beneath your feet holds fossils, and every app in your pocket holds futures. You are a creature of contradictions. You zoom through cities lit by algorithms, but your heart still breaks over handwritten letters. You can simulate a forest with pixels and code, but a real one still stuns you silent. The story of Earth, from stardust to skyscrapers, culminates here, in this essay marvellous moment. You are the first species to look back on its origin with clarity, and the only one to even imagine what lies ahead. All of history now exists within reach. Every triumph, every tragedy, every trace of every life that ever was, digitized, archived, backed up twice in case the servers crash. And you're both participant and witness. You work jobs that didn't exist 10 years ago. You read news written by bots. You consult apps before sleeping. You upload your laughter. You measure your steps, your calories, your dreams. You stream voices from the past and send messages to satellites sailing beyond Pluto. You don't just consume history anymore, you curate it. And yet, Despite the marvels, the conveniences, the miracles you now call normal, the big questions remain. What kind of future are you building? What kind of ancestor will you be? You live in an age of urgency. Climate tipping points, political chaos, technological upheaval. You sense the trembling, the pause before a turning. You know the next decades will define more than stock prices or gadget trends. They'll define survival. And not just of humans, of the systems you depend on, the ecosystems, the relationships, the very spirit of this pale blue dot. So you begin to look differently at the ground beneath your feet. You no longer see land as infinite, or air as automatic, or water as a guarantee. You begin to listen, to learn, to remember that Earth was never yours to dominate, only yours to tend. You recall ancient teachings you once dismissed as folklore, about balance, reciprocity, humility. Turns out they were survival guides all along, and as your awareness grows, so does your circle of care. You think not just in nations, but in generations. You consider the people not yet born, the creatures not yet catalogued, the forests not yet planted. You wonder what kind of legacy your data, your policies, your stories will leave. You think about restoration, not just innovation. You plant seeds you won't see grow. That might be the bravest thing you ever do. Because for all your power, your AI, your rockets, your neural interface, you are still vulnerable, still soft, still full of love and fear and songs. And it's this softness, not your machines, that might save you. Compassion, cooperation, the messy, miraculous art of trying. You've always tried. Since the first cell split, since the first fire sparked, since the first myth was whispered beside that fire. You've failed often, hurt each other, lost your way, but you've also forgiven, rebuilt, dreamed again. And dreaming, it turns out, is evolutionary. So you dream of cities where nature walks free, of rivers clean enough to drink from, of energy that harms no one, of cultures that celebrate difference, of justice without vengeance, of peace that feels like belonging. And even if it takes generations, you trust someone, somewhere will carry that dream forward. You've come so far, from stardust to oceans to empires to code, from stone tools to gene editing, from painting on cave walls to whispering across satellites, from a crawling hominid on a savanna to a conscious species that names stars and stories and selves. And you're still becoming, still unfolding, still not finished, and perhaps you never will be. So now the journey settles. The stars still glitter far above, but they no longer feel so far away. You've touched them, spoken to them, sent your stories into their light. And yet, here you are, back on Earth, back where it all began. The soil beneath you hums with the memory of ancient oceans. The wind still carries whispers of volcanoes, of mammoths, of migrations and myths. Every breath you take is borrowed from everything that ever lived. The noise fades now, the pace slows. Your thoughts soften like footprints in fresh snow. You remember, this planet has always held you. Through chaos, through calm, through fire and flood and starlight, it has fed you, tested you, raised you, and despite everything, it is still here. And so are you. You're stardust, yes, but you're also story, a line in the long living sentence of Earth, a heartbeat echoing across eons. You carry the memories of oceans, the fire of stars, and the quiet miracle of thought.
So sleep now.
Let the weight of history drift behind you like a leaf in wind. Let the rivers of time lull you toward dreams, where the trees still grow tall, the skies are clear, and the future hums softly in the distance. You've wandered far, you've witnessed wonders, so you're safe now. Rest. Sweet dreams.